Hello, it's time for French Politics here on France 24. I'm Mark Perlman.
And I'm Molly Hall. Here's what's coming up in today's show. A very unusual clash between the head of state and the military boss.
Local governments are ordered to tighten their belts as the president announces 13 billion euros in spending cuts.
And Emmanuel Macron addresses head-on a dark episode of French history during World War II.
Since his election, Emmanuel Macron has gone to great lengths to show that he is the commander-in-chief, driving down an armored vehicle and visiting wounded soldiers on Inauguration Day, then paying a visit to French troops in Mali for his first foreign trip, and spending a few hours in a submarine.
But being the boss can sometimes mean bringing bad news. And this is what the president did when his government announced budget cuts for the military, prompting a very unusual revolt from his chief of staff.
When it comes to certain topics, discretion is needed, especially from the military. That was the message from the French president. It came a day after his top general lambasted cuts to defence spending announced in this week's budget.
I believe it isn't dignified to wash dirty linen in public. I'm your commander-in-chief, and I know how to uphold the responsibilities that I've taken up before my fellow citizens and the armed forces.
Macron's comments were visibly directed at the French Army Chief of Staff, General de Villiers. The general told a parliamentary committee that the 850 million euros of cuts to defence spending for the rest of 2017 were not feasible given current commitments at home and abroad. I won't let myself be messed with like that, he said. I may be stupid, but I know when I'm being had. Macron insists the cuts enforced to help reduce the country's budget deficit will not put soldiers' lives at risk. In any case, he said, more cash will be spent on the armed forces next year.
In 2018, in agreement with my Prime Minister, we'll start this budget increase for the military. Their funding will go up to 34.2 billion euros, of which 650 million euros will be for external operations.
Currently, France spends around 1.7% of its GDP on defence. Macron has pledged to increase this to 2% by 2025.
Well, the chief of the army staff is scheduled to meet the president this coming Friday for what could be indeed his last day on the job. While defense is, of course, not the only sector feeling the squeeze, the president plans, for instance, to slash local government spending by 13 billion euros. It's more than the 10 billion euros initially announced.
The state must make substantial savings in order to reduce public spending by 3% of the GDP over the next 5 years, which, taking into account a reciprocal shares, would lead local and regional authorities to participate in the reduction of public administration deficit by 13 billion over a 5-year period. This is higher than we had anticipated because the situation found was more degraded than we thought. But it's a share that corresponds to the share of local and regional authorities in total public spending.
Well, the president making the announcement there. And Mark, this is not going down well with local authorities and with the head of the Senate. He fears those cuts will hit mostly the middle class.
I'm afraid that all this is very heavy on the shoulders of the middle classes of this country. And you know, when a municipality is poor, it needs middle classes to ensure its social balance. We have to be very careful about all of this.
Last weekend, President Macron invited the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to attend the 75th commemoration of the roundup of Jews in Paris during World War II. It was the first time that Israel's head of government was present, and the French president took this opportunity to speak about France's direct role in this somber episode.
On this wall are the names of more than 4,000 Jewish children deported to Nazi camps from Paris during the raid of the Valdiv. 75 years later, the French president came to pay homage at the Garden of Remembrance. Minutes earlier, Emmanuel Macron laid a wreath at the capital square of the Jewish martyrs before observing a minute's silence. The commemoration was also an occasion for the head of state to acknowledge France's role in the roundup.
C'est bien la France qui organisa la rafle.
It was indeed France that organized the roundup and deportation of almost all of the 13,152 people of Jewish faith that died. They were torn from their homes on the 16th and 17th of July 1942.
Les 16 et 17 juillet 1942 à leur domicile.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was also invited to the ceremony and paid tribute to those who died.
What happened here on that day in the heart of Paris, multiply it by 400 times. 400 Parises. And you will get the scale, the enormous scale of the destruction of European Jewry and the destruction of our children.
Among those who spoke at the service was Holocaust survivor Rachel Jedinak. She was 8 years old at the time of the raid. Her mother had attempted to hide her at her grandparents' home.
At dawn, we were startled by a banging on the door. It was two French policemen, one in uniform and the other in civilian clothes. They ordered us to dress quickly to join our mother.
Most of the victims were deported by train to concentration camps in Auschwitz. Fewer than 100 people survived. The event is regarded as one of the darkest chapters in France's history.
Now, by recognizing France's responsibility, Macron placed himself in the footsteps of former President Jacques Chirac, who broke years of silence and denial back in 1995.
The criminal madness of the occupier was, everyone knows this, seconded by the French, seconded by the French state.
Besides government spending, immigration has also been a key focus. Now, the government wants to improve the asylum process in hopes of better managing the ongoing migrant crisis. Well, the Prime Minister outlined his vision for a more effective system that cuts application time, weeds out economic migrants, and allows for better accommodation.
The way France deals with asylum seekers at present isn't good enough. That's the verdict of the country's Prime Minister, Edouard Philippe. It came as he outlined the government's plans to tackle the crisis.
Our objective is to reduce the time spent on processing asylum requests from the moment they're first registered to the moment they're accepted or rejected.
The aim is to speed up the asylum application process from a current average of around 14 months to 6 months. And a greater effort will be made to deport those who are not granted asylum, many of whom are said to be economic migrants. Philippe said that of 31,000 illegal immigrants who were ordered to leave France last year, fewer than 25,000 actually left. He wants these numbers to improve. But for those seeking or who have already gained asylum, much more lodging is needed.
We will create more accommodation, 4,000 extra spaces for asylum seekers in 2018 and another 3,500 in 2019. We now have around 80,000 places. That number will thus increase by about 10% over the next 2 years.
NGOs have said this won't nearly be enough, and even the government admits that around 40% of asylum seekers don't have a place to live right now. The government will present its new immigration plans as draft legislation to Parliament in September.
Well, this year, Donald Trump was the guest of honor at the Bastille Day celebrations. After a fancy dinner on top of the Eiffel Tower, he attended the military parade on July the 14th. Suddenly, the band veered off the traditional military music and started playing a medley of the French well-known band Daft Punk, and the reaction from the American president was quite different from that of his French counterpart.
Well, Emmanuel Macron has certainly used the Republic's pomp to try to seduce world leaders. We're going to leave you now with some images of Macron with Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, and Benjamin Netanyahu.
That's all for this week, and that's all for this season. Special thanks to Nariman Lawadi for all her help in putting this program together.
Reporters, presented by Mark Owen.
China dreams of becoming a world football superpower. When President Xi Jinping, himself a big football fan, says he wants China to hold the 2030 World Cup, everyone is on board. China's professional clubs are luring international stars with enormous contracts. The pressure is mounting in the city of Huangsu. The world's biggest football academy is pulling out all the stops to train China's future football elite.
Reporters on France 24 and France24.com.